isn't even human to begin with. You indeed are unlucky. Haha, it's almost like Han Hao was made to defeat you. Gilbert guffawed before stepping forward to Han Hao to look him up and down. After a moment, he exclaimed, "My gosh, you have changed so much, you're nothing like before." Han Hao turned to Gilbert and nodded. His ice-gold expression thawed a little. He replied, "And you look pretty much the same as before. Thank you for your assistance. If Polo had not intervened, the three of us wouldn't still be alive now," said Bollins suddenly with a solemn face. Han Hao glanced at Bollins and casually replied, "No need to thank me. We are all on the same side." It was no big deal to Han Hao. It was at this moment that the blushing Scarlet who had been standing behind Han Hao went to Han Shuo, bowed at him, and earnestly thanked him. "Thank you for healing my scars and leading me to this place. I really appreciate it." Upon hearing Scarlet's words, Han Shuo knew she must have figured out his lie about Han Hao inviting her to the fringe. However, it appeared not only was Scarlet not angry at Han Shuo, she even seemed grateful for it. After some quick thinking, Han Shuo nodded and replied, "My boy, Han Hao, is nescient of a certain matter. I believe that it is necessary for him to learn and experience it in his life for him to truly grow. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a complete man. Scarlet, you know what I'm saying, don't you?" Given Scarlet's intelligence, she effortlessly caught on to what he was referring to. A sliver of unsuppressed delight gushed into her heart. She nodded, peeking at Han Hao as she softly and bashfully answered, "Yes, I know exactly." "Perfect. I trust that you will do well in helping Han Hao develop in those aspects." Han Shuo chuckled with satisfaction before he turned to Little Skeleton and asked, "What brings you to the Pandemonium?" "Let Scarlet stay here for now. It's not quite safe at my side." Han Hao paused to think for a moment before he continued, "Other than that, I have obtained the quintessence shard of death. I know Father has invested considerable efforts into constructing the many demonic formations in the Pandemonium. This is the only place in the universe where I can safely investigate the secrets of the shard without being discovered by that guy." Han Shuo was rather confused as it was his first time hearing the words, quintessence shard. He raised a brow and replied, "Hold up, now what is a quintessence shard and how did you obtain it? Who exactly is this guy you are referring to?" Inside the gymnasium with them was no one but Bollins, Sanguis, Gilbert, and Scarlet, of whom none were outsiders. With that, Han Hao revealed everything in detail, telling them about the gravestone he obtained from the netherworld and the nature of the quintessence shard. Han Shuo had a dumbstruck look on his face when Han Hao completed his narration. Han Shuo immediately turned to Gilbert and gravely warned, "Make sure that you do not share any of what you've learned with anyone. Absolutely nothing." Han Shuo was very well aware of Gilbert's loose lips. Chapter 935, Sealing the Pandemonium, GDK 935. Sealing the Pandemonium. Gilbert was stunned by what he heard from Han Hao. He too realized the gravity of the matter and solemnly pledged to Han Shuo, "I will not say a word about this to anyone." A quintessence shard was once a vessel that held an over-god's quintessence. They were astounded to hear that Han Hao would possess such an invaluable artifact. They were also amazed and envious of Han Hao after learning about the miraculous abilities of the shard. This was the first time the party had heard about the existence of quintessence shards, even for Scarlet, someone who was born and raised on Elysium. Of the party, she was perhaps the most astounded by the bombshell. She looked at Han Hao with dazzling lights in her eyes, while wondering how many more secrets Han Hao had. "It seems to me the reason that the netherworld would attract soul energies from the various material planes near it, and the high concentration of the element of death found in its environment has something to do with this quintessence shard." Han Shuo put on a grave expression and remarked, "And that person you sense would no doubt be the overgod of death. It's fortunate that he cannot sense you while you are not using the quintessence shard. Otherwise, he would have gotten you when you were in Ronson Canyon." The quintessence shard was just too special and powerful of an object. Han Shuo knew that if the overgod of death discovered that Han Hao had the piece of quintessence shard, he would spare no effort to find and kill Han Hao. He would either repossess the shard or destroy it. In any case, he definitely will not allow anything to threaten his position and power. "Before I had grown to possess sufficient strength, I was unable to gather the element of death through the shard. But still, Through the inscriptions on the shard, I had been gaining profound knowledge and understanding of the element. It was after I attained high godhood that I started sensing the being's presence, constantly. Other than lightly studying it, I have never used the shard because I felt that it could threaten my life. But around last month, Dagmar suddenly showed up at a shared border of the Space Dominion and the Fringe. I had no choice but to activate the shard, unleashing its power to defend against Dagmar. I immediately sensed the being coming for me from the Death Dominion, and my suspicion was proved correct. With his brows bunched, Han Hao explained what he understood about the shard in detail. I will go double-check and make sure that all the formations in the Pandemonium are active before modifying the gymnasium. Once everything is set up, you may focus on learning the quintessence shard without any worry. If you could master the full power of the shard and fuse it with the demonic arts you cultivate, I believe that one day you can overthrow the overgod of death and become the next owner of the quintessence, said Han Shuo. Han Shuo took a short pause before instructing Han Hao. Gilbert's cultivation path is pretty similar to yours. He is also fusing demonic arts with an energy found in this world. But obviously, he's not quite as talented as you are and he's a little stuck. You should guide him and enlighten him while I'm away. Han Hao nodded, turned to the excited Gilbert and said, "Whatever questions you have, shoot. I will answer it to the best I can." Gilbert was overjoyed. He immediately went to Han Hao's side and started explaining the obstacles he faced when fusing the darkness energy and demonic energy in his body, hoping that Han Hao could guide him to the solution. Han Hao was indeed way more superior than Gilbert in this aspect. The energy of death and the demonic yuan in Han Hao's body had been fused together in a harmonious way, which required extremely profound mastery and insight. Han Hao had faced hurdles similar to those that were perplexing Gilbert now. As fellow brethren of the Han family, Han Hao unreservedly helped Gilbert and detailedly described how he solved it long ago. Sanguis, Bollins, and even Scarlet gathered around the two and listened to their conversation. Although their cultivations were different from Gilbert's, they hoped to learn a thing or two from Han Hao. Besides, some of Han Hao's explanations will include his understanding of demonic arts, which could be relevant to Sanguis and Bollins. Therefore, they listened to Han Hao's lecture just as intently as Gilbert. Seeing the few earnestly listening to Han Hao's lecture left a smile on Han Shuo's face. He left the gymnasium and ascended to the Pandemonium's surface in an instant. After standing on the round monolith that was engraved with the outline of the cauldron of Myriad Demon, Han Shuo transmitted to the cauldron spirit. Given its current defensive power, is the Pandemonium capable of shielding itself from the senses of an overgod? Yes, of course, replied cauldron spirit immediately and most confidently. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before he realized that he had not conveyed his meaning clearly. So he added, "I mean, an overgod with the quintessence." Cauldron spirit kept silent for quite a while before he replied, "You mean the kind of god who possesses the purest source of a fundamental force?" "Yeah, that kind," replied Han Shuo. Cauldron spirit hesitated for a moment before he answered, "With my power alone, I don't think I can shield it, but with both our powers, it should be doable." "All right. Then let's start by activating all the demonic formations in the Pandemonium. Then, we will reinforce those formations for blocking soul probing with our energy. I will also divert a portion of my consciousness and energy to assist you. We need to obstruct all possible soul sensing," instructed Han Shuo after thinking for a moment. Upon receiving Han Shuo's command, the cauldron of Myriad Demon flew out from his body and slowly sank into the crux of the Pandemonium, the monolith engraved with its outline. Han Shuo then sat cross-legged, diverted a portion of his consciousness to the cauldron spirit, and began injecting the demonic yuan in his body into the monolith underneath him. Simultaneously, Han Shuo's avatar of destruction flew out from his main body. He took a moment to observe the fog around the Pandemonium that was growing thicker and the energy field growing stronger. Happy with what he saw, the avatar nodded and returned to the underground palace, back to the gymnasium where Han Hao and the others were. Han Hao at this moment was carefully explaining his experience in fusing two energies from different universes. Other than Gilbert, whose questions were being answered, Bollins, Sanguis, and Scarlet were listening to his explanation with their complete attention. They were all wearing pensive looks, as though they had learned something from Han Hao's lecture. Seeing that they were learning earnestly, the avatar Han Shuo decided not to disrupt the class. He stood at the entrance silently and listened to Little Skeleton's comprehension of those energies. The cultivation path Little Skeleton had taken was different from Han Shuo's. As Little Skeleton had inherited only a portion of Han Shuo's memories about demonic arts and being a non-human life form, he cannot cultivate the orthodox school of demonic arts in the same way that Han Shuo did. But being a non-human life form has its advantages. As Little Skeleton was an undead creature of the netherworld, he was gifted in the cultivation of the energy of death and had been improving at an extraordinary rate. At the same time, Little Skeleton did not give up on cultivating demonic arts. As his life force was different from that of a human being, even if he cultivates the same demonic arts as Han Shuo, he could only unleash a portion of the full power of demonic arts. If Little Skeleton were to stick to that cultivation path, it would only limit his potential. But fortunately, Little Skeleton was unusually talented and somehow managed to fuse the energy of death with demonic arts, paving his own unique cultivating path and continued to soar in strength. Currently, he was the strongest member of the House of Han after Han Shuo. Gilbert seemed delighted, as though he had found the solutions to many of his cultivation hurdles from Han Hao. After a long while, Gilbert suddenly interrupted. "Pause, please pause." Under Han Hao's puzzled gaze, Gilbert put on a rather embarrassed look and said, "You have said enough to clear not just my current hurdles, but many more to come. That's plenty of information, and I'm afraid that my brain doesn't have enough space left for more. Besides, without reaching the higher realm state, I wouldn't understand anything you say. I might as well stop listening and come back to you for more when I'm ready." Han Hao nodded and calmly replied, "Okay." Han Shuo, who had been watching at the entrance, nodded proudly. Despite the temptation, Gilbert remained aware of his capacity and did not bite off more than what he can chew. It was one of those things harder to accomplish than it sounded. This showed that he had grown much more mature than he was back in the profound continent. "Sanguis, Ballins, Gilbert, and Miss Scarlet, please exit the gymnasium and keep out," instructed Han Shuo as he summoned the 5 elite zombies over with his consciousness. Han Shuo explained, "Things might get a little out of hand when Han Hao delves into the quintessence shard. Having your auras and life force in this region could produce undesirable effects." "Understood." Ballins nodded and was the first to leave. He knew that staying in the gymnasium could indirectly affect Han Hao. "Good luck!" Sanguis and Gilbert also did not hesitate, and they happily followed behind Ballins. Scarlet, however, was feeling rather worried. She had been feeling uneasy after being informed about what the object in Han Hao's chest really was, and that the overgod of death could be hunting for him. It was common knowledge to Elysians that overgods with the quintessence were invincible beings. She was genuinely concerned that Han Hao would be harmed. Han Hao bunched his brows when he saw that Scarlet was reluctant to leave. Abruptly, a strange, indescribable feeling once again rose from his heart. He took a moment to feel and digest the emotion before he soothed Scarlet in a tender voice. "My father is here. I will be fine. Wait for me outside." Scarlet's heart would melt whenever Han Hao speaks to her in that manner. She nodded obediently and said, "Be careful," and silently left. Soon after, the 5 elite zombies arrived at the gymnasium, and they cheerfully greeted Little Skeleton. "Stand around the gymnasium in a pentagon. Deploy the penta-elemental undead formation and isolate this region," instructed Han Shuo. Then, when they were in position, he said to Little Skeleton, "All right, let's begin." Chapter 936, Father and Sons Joining Power, GDK 936. Father and Sons Joining Power, Han Shuo and the Cauldron of Myriad Demon were overseeing the pandemonium from the formation Crux on the surface. Adding to the penta-elemental undead formation deployed by the 5 elite zombies, Han Shuo believed that Han Hao could safely activate the gravestone in the pandemonium without alerting the overgod of death. A burst of chilling wind suddenly blew in the pandemonium. Shadows barely visible to the naked eye whooshed across the thick mist and gathered on various demonic formations. Han Shuo split his consciousness into millions of strands and scattered it across the pandemonium, forming a unique boundary made of soul energy that could obstruct every form of soul probing. Inside the gymnasium, red, yellow, gold, white, and green radiances began shooting everywhere. The 5 elite zombies, who were sitting cross-legged around the gymnasium, flooded the space with their energies and expelled all elemental energies. Then, suddenly, the gymnasium seemed to have entered another dimension. Bollins, Sanguis, Gilbert, and Scarlet could see inside the gymnasium. It felt as though the gymnasium was millions of light years away. It was as though the gymnasium was no longer a part of the Elysium, as though what they saw in front of them was an illusion. The 5 elite zombies, Han Hao and Han Shu, were sitting just in front of them, and yet they could not sense the slightest hint of their auras. If they were to close their eyes and look using just their souls, they would see an empty field of nothingness. The energy of the 5 elite zombies has completely isolated the gymnasium from the rest of the world. The law of spacetime has been altered, and the gymnasium has effectively become a material plan of its own. It may seem as though they are right in front of us, but they are no longer a part of the Elysium. I believe that even an overgod won't be able to detect their activity inside, remarked the astounded Bollins after sensing the changes to the gymnasium. Sanguis and Gilbert were amazed. They did not expect that the formation formed by the 5 elite zombie would be so miraculous. It was as though they had created a separated, independent spacetime in the gymnasium. In this universe, the overgod of space might be the only other existence capable of such a marvelous feat. Of the 4, Scarlet was perhaps the most dumbstruck, as she did not know much about the House of Han, nor was she aware of the miraculousness of demonic arts. She was rather confused after seeing the 5 elite zombies, none of whom cultivated the edict of space, disconnecting the gymnasium from the rest of the world. She almost thought that she was hallucinating. Sanguis, Gilbert, and Miss Scarlet, we should retreat a little, suggested Bollins before he quickly explained. The spacetime around the gymnasium is now very unstable. The entrance before us should be one of the few remaining links still connecting the gymnasium to the Elysium. If Han Hao were to do something that destabilizes spacetime fissures could be generated, and we might get trapped in a corner of the universe. Upon hearing Bollins' words, Scarlet hastily retreated. Even the usually bold Gilbert jolted and quickly made some distance from the gymnasium with the others, lest they be affected by the highly unstable boundary. Han Shu's avatar of destruction carefully sensed the energy that filled the gymnasium and sensed the energies of the 5 elite zombies gradually fusing together. Thinking that everything was ready, he nodded to Han Hao and said, "You may begin." Han Hao, who had sat cross-legged on the ground, slowly closed his eyes. His chest started throbbing and pulsing bizarrely. Moments later, bit by bit, the quintessence shard emerged from Han Hao's chest and hovered a meter before him. When the quintessence shard emerged, the gymnasium, which had been purged of elemental energies and isolated from the environment by the elite zombies, was suddenly flooded with the element of death. They came pouring in through the tiny spacetime fissures around the gymnasium and gathered towards the shard. Oh no, the power of the shard is indeed extraordinary, so much so that it could absorb the lament of death in dimensional fissures through the spacetime fissures, cried Han Shuo in alarm, and he immediately commanded the 5 elite zombies, "Deploy all your power and seal those spacetime fissures. If we are to allow the element of death from the environment to enter the shard, the overgod will surely sense it." The 5 elite zombies recognized how grave the situation was and immediately exerted all their strengths, releasing streams of colorful radiances that assembled and fused with the 5-colored cloud on the top of the gymnasium. The penta-elemental undead formation became even more energetic, and all the spacetime fissures were sealed. Simultaneously, Han Shu's consciousness that had split up and scattered across various regions sensed the unusual flow of the element of death in the pandemonium. They were gushing into the gymnasium through those fissures at an unimaginable rate. Han Shu was alarmed. He sent a portion of his consciousness to the gymnasium and formed a layer of boundary around it. The thousands and thousands of demon generals aimlessly wandering around the pandemonium suddenly shot into the boundary and adhered to it. The originally invisible barrier suddenly turned to a dark shade. It was as though a dark eggshell had enveloped the gymnasium. After retreating to a safe distance, Bollins suddenly discovered that there was a layer of dark substance shrouding the gymnasium. He immediately cried, "It's my senior brother's energy." Sanguis and Gilbert also detected Hanshu's life aura on the dark substance. The spectators were shocked and stared at the black shell in astonishment while guessing what was going on. At the same time, over at a waterfall in the border of the fringe, a burst of light suddenly came from Nestor's eyes, and he gazed at the depths of the fringe. Nestor could sense a strand of energy that he was most familiar with broadcasting from the depths of the fringe. He was certain that the quintessence shard bearer must have activated the shard again. He immediately started moving towards it. However, just as Nestor turned his body, he suddenly discovered that the aura of death seemed to be concealed by some kind of energy, and he lost track of the beacon. What is going on? Why did the signal suddenly vanish? This is strange. Nestor was somewhat puzzled. He knew the characteristics of the death element quintessence shard better than anyone, and that there was no way to conceal the pure energy the shard emanates when the bearer uses it. After bunching his brows and thinking for a moment, Nestor still had no clue what might have happened. But nonetheless, he started moving towards the rough direction of the shard. Once a quintessence shard was activated, no ordinary energy could conceal it. The energies used by Hanshuo, Cauldron Spirit, and the 5 elite zombies, however, did not originate from this universe. Using their miraculous demonic arts, they had managed to temporarily conceal the purest energy emanating from the quintessence shard. This was why the shard had suddenly dropped out of Nestor's senses. The millions of strands of consciousness, and the tens of thousands of demon general energy, had gathered to form a layer of extremely tough defensive barrier around the gymnasium. On top of that, the 5 elite zombies had isolated the gymnasium from the Elysium. By working together, they managed to conceal the energy emanating from Han Hao's quintessence shard. "Good. Keep going," shouted Han Shu's avatar of destruction. Han Hao explored the secrets of the quintessence shard freely and without any worry. The 7 bone spurs on his back were trembling slightly as his purple eyes stared fixedly at the gravestone hovering before him. The abstruse inscriptions on the gravestone could vaguely be seen flashing in his eyes. All these while, as Han Hao had constantly sensed the presence of the tremendously mighty existence, he never dared to delve and study the gravestone intensively. But it was different this time. With Han Shu and the 5 elite zombies helping him conceal the energy, Han Hao knew that he could finally study it without fear of being tracked by the overgod of death. He opened up his soul and tried to learn the gravestone's power and gain complete control over it. Lines of bizarre runes began to float out from Han Hao's eyes and slowly flowed into the gravestone. Gradually, the gravestone that was only the size of a fist started enlarging, and in just moments, it had grown to several dozen meters tall. There were eerily white inscriptions slowly moving about the gravestone's surface as though they were alive. At this moment, Han Hao seemed very tiny while sitting next to the enormous gravestone, but Han Hao did not seem to panic. The 7 bone spurs on his back suddenly detached from his body and stuck on the enormous gravestone. Then, without any warning, blood-curdling shrieks and wails simultaneously sounded from the 7 bone spurs. Desperation, fear, pain, madness, hatred, and other negative energies overflowed from the bone spurs. The energy came from the countless tormented souls which Han Hao had accumulated over the years. Densely packed runes were swimming inside Han Hao's pupils, synchronizing with the gravestone in front of him. It was as though some sort of incredibly abstruse connection was being formed. Crack! Crack! The gravestone that had reached the top of the gymnasium was still enlarging, causing a most frightening sound to play in the gymnasium. It was as though the gymnasium would burst apart at any moment. The 5 elite zombies were wearing grave expressions, and sweat had drenched their faces. It seemed as though they had exhausted a considerable amount of energy. "Father, if the gravestone bursts through the gymnasium, this space will immediately collapse, and our remaining connection to the Elysium will be severed. What should we do?" transmitted Han Jin to Han Shuo. Han Shuo was aware of the situation. If the gravestone bursts through the gymnasium, the spacetime constructed with the joint power of the 5 elite zombies will crumble. By then, even if they weren't crushed into smithereens, they would be sent into distant corners of the universe and be trapped in the endless void of space for the rest of their lives, with no hopes of ever seeing another living being again. Han Xiuo attempted to communicate with Han Hao, but discovered that his soul had now intertwined with the gravestone. It seemed to be fusing with the gravestone. Throughout this process, Han Hao must not be distracted by the slightest, or the consequences will be unimaginable. After hesitating for the moment, Han Xiuo instructed, "He has entered the most critical stage. We need to keep hanging on. Do not push against the gravestone. We do not know how it would reach, and it could cause dire results." Understood. The 5 elite zombies gritted their teeth and replied. It had been arduous for them to maintain the spacetime, and the expanding gravestone was only making the task harder. If it wasn't for Han Hao, they wouldn't have agreed to it without any hesitation. They were putting their lives on the line. If spacetime collapses, their bodies and souls would be absolutely shattered. Chapter 937, Fusing with the Quintessence Shard, GDK 937. Fusing with the Quintessence Shard following Han Xiuo's orders. The 5 elite zombies remained steadfast in arduously sustaining the gymnasium, despite the gravestone threatening to destabilize the spacetime. Although the gravestone was pushing and cracking the roof of the gymnasium, the 5 elite zombies did not apply any forces on the gravestone or stop it from expanding in any way for the fear that it would cause an adverse reaction on Han Hao. Han Xiuo's consciousness in the form of millions of strands, enhanced with demon general energy, continued to envelop the gymnasium and prevent the gravestone's energy from leaking into the environment. Both the elite zombies and Han Xiuo were in grave danger. If the gravestone were to puncture the gymnasium roof, the energy field around the gymnasium would rapidly destabilize and the spacetime would collapse. Even though Han Xiuo's main body was not there, his consciousness would suffer serious injuries. It could be said that Han Xiuo and the 5 elite zombies' lives were now in Little Skeleton's hand. Little Skeleton, completely focused and occupied with fusing with the gravestone's energy, however, doesn't seem to be aware of the grave danger they were in. Currently, his soul was intertwined with the gravestone, and he could not sense Han Xiuo's nervousness. His eyes, flashing with inscriptions, continued to stare fixedly at the gravestone, giving off dazzling white light. Although not a trace of energy from the environment could enter the gymnasium, the gravestone just doesn't stop expanding. It continued to push at the gymnasium roof, threatening to destabilize the spacetime around it. Crack, crack, noises that made their hair stand on the back of their necks sounded from above their heads. Sweat poured profusely from the elite zombies' foreheads as they tried not to be distracted and exerted their full strength to sustain the spacetime field. Han Xiuo's consciousness continued to split and recombine at the area that the gravestone was pushing. To ensure that not the slightest energy could leak from the gymnasium, Han Xiuo had to fill the gaps with demon generals. PSZZ, PSZZ, wisps of thin gray smoke were seen coming from the tip of the gravestone. Demon generals were being annihilated as their energy was used up on containing the gravestone's energy. Han Xiuo and the 5 elite zombies watched the gravestone with their hearts palpitating, dreading a sudden surge of energy from it that would destroy the gymnasium and blast them to hell. Then, while everyone could not be more anxious and worried, the power emanating from the gravestone suddenly transformed. There was a clear indication of Little Skeleton's soul energy in it, as if his soul and the gravestone were one. Simultaneously, the power exuding from the gravestone gradually started to dwindle, and it even started to shrink in size. Han Xiuo and the 5 elite zombies all heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. From the moment the gravestone started shrinking, they understood that the most dangerous phase had passed and that the spacetime was no longer in danger of collapsing. The inscriptions that could fill libraries revolved around Han Hao as the gravestone continued to shrink. Then, when it slimmed down to approximately his size, the gravestone suddenly shattered like glass. All of the fragments were around the size of a thumb, and they flew towards Han Hao. The shattered fragments of the gravestone carried some miraculous energy. They penetrated Han Hao's skin and entered deep into his body. As if he was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep, sinister radiances flashed from his eyes, and he sprung to his feet. He started a peculiar, eerie, energetic dance in the gymnasium. Crack, crunch, krrrr, tuck. Crisp notes sounded from Han Hao's body as if his skeleton were being crushed into pieces. In the next few moments, his body would turn as flexible as boneless, his limbs and body twist and move beyond the natural range of motion. Gravestone inscriptions would also appear on his skin. It was a peculiar scene, to say the least. "Father, what is happening?" asked Metal Elite Zombie hastily to Han Shuo. The energy of the shard was scattered, and those pieces fissioned to fuse with his bones. "I'm not sure if Han Hao is doing this voluntarily, but I believe that this is beneficial to him. So, don't worry," explained Han Shuo's avatar, who continued to keep a close eye on Han Hao. Han Shuo could sense that the pure energy inside the gravestone had fused with Han Hao. The inscriptions imprinted on his skin and flesh, while the fragments were fusing with his skeleton. After performing the eerie dance for some time, Han Hao suddenly collapsed to the ground powerlessly. He lied silent and completely motionless. The inscriptions on his skin stopped meandering just as Han Hao stopped moving. However, the crisp, frightening cracking noises continued to sound from his body. Outside the gymnasium, Scarlet covered her lips in shock and sorrow. She gazed at Han Hao, who had collapsed on the ground with her wet eyes. She felt as though a part of her heart had been torn away, and pain greater than any she had felt before. As she was outside the gymnasium, she was unable to sense Han Hao's aura and had no idea that the transformation was beneficial and not harmful to Han Hao. Ballins, Sanguis, and Gilbert were also isolated from the gymnasium, and only their vision was not obstructed. From their point of view, the gravestone had suddenly shattered and shot into Han Hao's body. Han Hao violently twitched in pain before he succumbed to the gravestone's power and collapsed. Unable to sense that the gravestone was fusing with Han Hao's flesh and skeleton, they thought that the gravestone rejected and attacked Han Hao and that he was now on the verge of dying. And no, Scarlet, who was overcome by anguish, tried barging into the gymnasium. Ballins was alarmed and he hastily pulled Scarlet to stop her. Calmly yet sternly, he said, "What we see might not be the truth, do not act rashly. Barging in not only won't help Han Hao, but you will also be injured by the barrier around the gymnasium." Gilbert and Sanguis hastily went to block Scarlet's path, preventing Scarlet from doing anything reckless. Other than not hoping Scarlet will get injured, they were worried that she might destabilize the energy field around the gymnasium. Han Hao was in a critical phase now, and even the slightest fluctuation could cause a cascade failure. They would not risk letting Scarlet indirectly injure those in the gymnasium. Is he? Scarlet pointed a trembling finger at Han Hao, who was in the gymnasium, sorrow brimming from her teary eyes. Ballins was rather astounded and puzzled. He did not expect that Scarlet would be so deeply in love with Han Hao. He thought that a life form as callous and emotionless as Han Hao would have no luck in getting a romantic partner. Ballins shook his head and consoled. "He will be fine. Our senses cannot reach into the gymnasium, and we have no clue if the actual situation is as we saw. Besides, with my senior brother around, even if something bad happens to Han Hao, his life will not be in danger. You can be sure about that." Ballins was not lying or boasting. He knew that Han Shuo had managed to resurrect Gilbert back then on the Profound Continent. And given that Han Shuo had now grown thousands of times stronger, it would be effortless for him to resurrect Han Hao. That's right. In fact, back then on the Profound Continent, I was dead, but my master resurrected me using his power. So, you have nothing to worry about. Han Hao will definitely be just fine, remarked Gilbert, sharing his past experience in an attempt to comfort Scarlet. "Yes, don't worry. I have dueled that guy, and I know that his soul is stronger beyond imagination. I believe that even if his body is shattered for whatever reason, his soul would remain intact. And as long as the soul remains, my master would have ways of resurrecting him," added Sanguis. After hearing Ballins, Gilbert, and Sanguis' consoling words, although not fully convinced, Scarlet had calmed down somewhat and was no longer desperate to barge into the gymnasium. It was at this moment that a finger of Han Hao's made a slight movement. Like a chain reaction, his hands, arms, neck, and body seemed to suddenly regain their energy. Han Hao abruptly rose to his feet before exercising his neck and flexing his arms with a curious look on his face. Just as he was struggling to find more comforting words to spew at Scarlet, Gilbert caught sight of the waltzing little skeleton, as good as new. "Holy fuck, he's alive," he exclaimed. "I knew it. There's no way that he would die so easily," remarked Sanguis before he muttered to himself. It seems that the quintessence shard had fused with him. His strength must have grown even greater. It appears that I have much catching up to do. Inside the gymnasium, the 5 elite zombies simultaneously cheered. Although they still had to remain stationary, their lips had not stopped moving. Elder brother, you all right? Haha, I know you will be all right. Elder brother, you really scared us good just now. We thought that the gravestone will keep on expanding. Honestly, I was really frightened. If the gravestone's energy suddenly got out of control, we will be so dead. Haha, elder brother, have you got full control over that thing? Is it good to use? How awesome. While gradually withdrawing their energies from the gymnasium, the 5 elite zombies babbled to Han Hao excitedly and cheerfully. Han Hao could tell from the genuine smiles on their faces that they sincerely cared for him. And after hearing their words, he came to realize that they had been in grave danger and his brothers had risked their lives for him. His heart was filled with warmth. He revealed a faint smile and answered, I'm all right. I have fully merged with the quintessence shard. I can now use some of its powers without alerting that guy. Behold, our future overgod of death. Han Shuo guffawed before continuing, in the coming War of the Fringe, you shall end log for me. Han Hao thought in silence for a moment before putting on a faint smirk and replied, Okay. Chapter 938 Conspiracy, GDK 938. Conspiracy after the energies of the 5 elite zombies were removed from the gymnasium. Scarlet, Ballins, Sanguis, and Gilbert could finally sense the presence of all those in it. After the soul boundary deployed by Han Shu vanished, the 4 re-entered the gymnasium together. Gilbert and the others immediately congratulated Han Hao. Scarlet returned to Han Hao's side and was no longer worried after seeing that he was very much alive. Han Shu felt content, and he could not be prouder of Han Hao's achievement. He believed that with more time, Han Hao could achieve even greater feats. On the surface of the pandemonium, Han Shu's main body slowly got to his feet. The cauldron of myriad demon, which had stabilized every demonic formation in the base, returned into Han Shu's body. Han Shu was about to go back underground and ask Han Hao about his situation in detail. But suddenly, he turned his focus outwards. His senses pierced through the layers of mists shrouding the pandemonium before he started scanning a mountain range nearby. Han Shu sensed a spot in the mountain range where the energy of lightning was much more intense than the surroundings. After withdrawing his consciousness from the gymnasium, Han Shu immediately sensed the distant and faint anomaly which no ordinary expert could detect. The pandemonium was essentially a giant machine that gathers elemental energies from the environment, meaning that the elemental energies around the pandemonium would always gradually flow towards the valley. But Han Shu's consciousness sensed that somewhere deep in the mountain range, there was a spot where the element of lightning was not drawn towards the pandemonium, and somehow it was more intense than the environment. With one thought, Han Shuo sent a strand of his consciousness to stealthily fly towards that anomalous region. Upon arrival, Han Shuo detected that a mighty being was hiding there. The being emanated an aura that Han Shuo was most familiar with. It was none other than Sala's. Han Shuo let out a cold groan. His main body disappeared in a flash, piercing through the layers of mists and boundaries surrounding the pandemonium without a trace. Han Shuo had memorized the terrains surrounding the pandemonium down to the position of each rock. He could get anywhere within his territory with complete stealth. Salas, oh Salas, how foolish of you to return here and try to probe my base. Hee, I shall fulfill your wish and turn you into salad, thought Han Shuo with a sneer on his face. Salas had not only joined the Godhunter Alliance hegemons in ambushing Han Shuo at the Misty Seas, but he was also working with the Godhunter Alliance in their invasion of the Fringe. If Han Shuo could slaughter Salas before the impending invasion, the Fringe dwellers would have a strategic advantage over the invaders. It was obvious that Salas came to scout the pandemonium in preparation for the upcoming war. It was only natural that Han Shuo, who had inadvertently found him, would not allow Salas to escape once more. Salas, who had concealed himself in that region, carefully probed the situation around the pandemonium using his divine soul. He understood that the pandemonium was filled with all kinds of dangers and that Han Shu should be inside. Therefore, he had been very cautious about it. His divine soul was wandering and drifting around when suddenly, He felt as though a chilling wind was blowing towards his soul. Salas was jolted as his instincts told him that grave danger was up ahead. He instantly withdrew his divine soul. A burst of soul-tremoring energy suddenly shot at him. Salas felt as though his divine soul had been stabbed by frigid icicles, threatening to freeze and trap his soul. Sala's divine soul was injured in no time. Flustered, he withdrew his divine soul back into his divine body as quickly as possible. In neither loud nor soft voice, he spoke, "Who is it?" "Heh." A peal of derisive, sinister laughter sounded from the distance and quickly moved closer to Salas. The sound was strangely terrifying. Sala's face jolted, and in a deep voice he said, "It's you, indeed." For whatever reason, Salas did not immediately try to escape but stood where he was, as though waiting for Han Shu to appear. "I did not expect that you still dare to return to my pandemonium," said the sneering voice that was moving closer and closer. An eerie breeze blew out of nowhere, and Han Shu's figure abruptly materialized before Salas. With a mocking smile, he asked, "Salas, do you really think that it was by mere luck that I've defeated you here? Simply because you've used up some power-fighting Asura before I fought you?" While mocking Salas, the demon generals emerged from Han Shu's body, blocking all possible escape routes of Salas. Although Han Shu had no idea why Salas did not immediately escape, he would not simply let go of the opportunity to trap Salas. The thousands and thousands of demon generals had filled the space around them as Han Shu spoke. Individually, none of the demon generals could injure Salas, who cultivated the lightning energy, a natural weakness of demon generals. However, Han Shuo's intention wasn't to directly block Salas using the demon generals, but to affect the movement of spacetime using them, preventing Salas from using portal scrolls to escape. And Han Shu knew that he could easily overpower Salas, giving him no chance to use his lightning energy against the demon generals. "I know that luck had nothing to do with it. Even if I was in tip-top condition, I would still be no match against you." Salas stared at Han Shu with a serious look as he said, "And after our encounter at the Misty Sea, I've become even more certain that I'm absolutely no match against you." Han Shu was rather surprised to hear that answer. He raised a brow, looked at Salas up and down with puzzled eyes, and asked, "Then, what do you come here alone for?" Han Shu smirked and asked, "Don't tell me that you really have a death wish." "Brian, I did not come here to fight you," said Salas firmly. "Huh?" Han Shu was a little amused and curious. With the space around Salas now under the influence of the demon generals, it was impossible for him to escape. Han Shu thought that there was no harm in taking some time to listen to Salas' last words. "I flattened your Empyrean peak and took your place in the Omphalos. But you are telling me that you don't want to fight me?" Han Shu laughed and shook his head as though he could not believe what he had heard before he continued, "Well, now this is interesting. Tell me then, what are you here for?" "I'm here to propose a collaboration," answered Salas. But after thinking for a moment, as though afraid that Han Shu wouldn't believe his words, he quickly added, "There is no way that I can genuinely befriend the God Hunters, as after all, I'm not a God Hunter. Besides, those God Hunter hegemons are unreliable. I have no way of trusting them. I know Tyre and Log very well. They scheme against others all the time. There is no way that I would cooperate with them. What about Wasir and Asura? Their reputation in the Fringe is not that bad. Why didn't you look for them? I have dueled Wasir and Asura. If they can't even defeat me, how can I trust them?" Salas had a disdained look on his face as he explained, "I, Salas, have my own set of principles and conducts. Those who cannot defeat me are not worthy of my consideration. That is my way." Han Shu became even more interested in the topic after hearing the explanation. He put on a big smile and asked, "Well then, how do you want to cooperate? What can you give me and what can I give you?" "I can give you all the information about the God Hunter Alliance and lead them into your traps. They are not familiar with the Fringe and they will listen to my advice with no doubt," answered Salas immediately as though he had prepared for it. Then, after taking a short pause and taking a deep breath, Salas continued, "I wish to return to the Fringe. After this war is over, some of the sovereigns will die. It could be Tyre and Log or Wasir and Asura, or perhaps even all of them. By then, all you need to do is give me a hand and acknowledge my position." "That simple?" asked Han Shu. "It's that simple," said Salas resolutely. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo bunched his brows and looked at Salas. Why would I trust you? If Salas was sincere in cooperating with Han Shuo, he would have a better certainty of the outcome of the war. But as Salas and Han Shuo used to be enemies, there was a good chance that Salas might betray him during the critical moments. Making even the slightest mistake could mean altering the entire war. Therefore, Han Shuo dare not take Salas' words easily. I also can't tell you why you should. However, if you agree to my proposal, I can provide you with a few very critical pieces of information right now. It will help you understand the situation better and even give you some advantages. Replied Salas seemed somewhat troubled, as though he could not think of a way to prove his sincerity. Han Shuo hesitated for a while before he nodded and said, "All right, I will work with you. Now tell me about it." For some reason, Salas seemed to trust Han Shuo. Not worried that Han Shuo might eat his words, he immediately said, "Dagmar knows that Han Hao possesses a quintessence shard, and he had been scheming to take it from him. He had brought all his experts from the Death Dominion over, and he's going all in. In addition, I discovered that Tyre and Daka of the Destruction Dominion could be connected. Tyre had been unusually informed about every movement of the God Hunter Alliance, and Daka seemed to have spies in the Fringe. He knows too much about the Fringe. But the connection between Tyre and Daka is only my own speculation. I do not have concrete evidence yet. I'm telling you this so that you wouldn't be caught surprised if it's true. Right? Don't you think that the two have rather similar appearances?" Han Shuo put on a surprised look. He recalled their faces for a moment, and they did look vaguely similar to Han Shuo. He also recalled that both of them cultivated the energy of destruction. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo said, "I think we have much to discuss." Salas was elated. It was obvious that Han Shuo was finally convinced that he was sincere. The two deployed layers of boundaries around them and held their discussion right in that spot. After hatching a conspiracy, Salas stealthily departed from the pandemonium. Chapter 939, not a half-assed overgod over at the center of the Fringe, the Omphalos. Tyre, Log, Asura, and Wasir were having a meeting at Tyre's sovereign shop about the God Hunter Alliance's impending invasion. As time went by, the four sovereigns managed to collect more intel about their enemy's movement. They had verified sources that all 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance had arrived outside their border. The Great War could erupt at any moment soon. The four sovereigns had completed their preparations. They did their best subduing as many fringe dwellers under their command as possible. All the usually aggressive fringe dwellers were now suddenly monks and ceased slaughtering each other. Stringers had been especially active, constantly scouting and collecting intel. "Asura, of the four of us, you are the closest to Brian. Do you know why he is still not attending the meeting?" asked Tyre, whose face was rather dark. He had sent messengers to the pandemonium, inviting Han Shuo to join their meetings. However, Stratham would always decline the invitations on Han Shuo's behalf, giving the excuse that Han Shuo was in secluded meditation. And now, Han Shuo continued to decline attending the meeting when they received intel that the God Hunter Alliance was right outside the Fringe. To Tyre, this was inexcusable. Asura shook his head and replied, "I too have sent people over. They've received the same answer as yours. It seems that Brian is at a critical juncture of his cultivation. Well, in any case, we have agreed on our responsibilities and strategy long ago. I think he would have made the necessary preparations." "I sure hope so," Tyre groaned and disdainfully remarked. If his side was to crumble like a biscuit, those god hunters could march straight into the Omphalos and attack us from our backs. None of us could afford the slightest negligence. Right, Asura, please remind him again that the god hunters could attack any time now and that he better be ready. Sure. Given the circumstances, Asura agreed to Tyre's request right away instead of bickering. I hope he can handle the pressure. He's been real domineering during recent times. He ought to have something to back that kind of attitude, remarked Log in his malicious, cunning smile. Hey, you, stop right there. You are not allowed to enter. A cry suddenly sounded from outside the sovereign's shop. Tyre's face suddenly turned dark and he seemed displeased. The sovereign shop was under his name, and many in the Omphalos knew that he and the other sovereigns were gathered there. The four mightiest existences in the Fringe were gathered in that room. Who would be so reckless as to trespass on the shop and interrupt their meeting? Pow! A muffled thud sounded outside the sovereign's shop before it returned to the usual silence. Hee hee, Tyre, it seems that someone is taking a piss on your turf. Interesting, interesting, teased Log with a mischievous smirk. Wasir and Asura, meanwhile, were flabbergasted. They had no idea who the intruder was, and they couldn't understand how someone could be so bold or foolish to trespass on the area where 4 sovereigns had gathered. No matter who it has just sent itself to death. Tyre suddenly turned from angered to amused. Instead of going outside to check on the situation, he sat in his seat and waited for the intruder to come to him. Although Tyre did not step outside the chamber, using his mighty divine soul, he sensed that the intruder was a cultivator of the death energy and was only at the mid-stage high god realm. Although an expert of this class was not abundantly found in the fringe and quite powerful, Tyre, perhaps the strongest of the sovereigns, could not feel less threatened by that kind of strength. Yet, Tyre found it very strange that an expert of that class would dare intrude his territory. Besides, the henchman he had stationed outside the shop was a late-stage high god expert who should be capable of stopping the intruder. While Tyre was thinking about the peculiar situation, he was suddenly jolted. He discovered that fissures abruptly developed on the boundary he deployed, allowing a figure to enter the meeting room. The intruder swept his gaze across the 4 sovereigns before fixing it on Log. He unenthusiastically asked, "Are you Log?" Log was startled. When his gaze met that of the intruder, he suddenly felt that the divine energy in his body was behaving rather strangely. They turned rather disordered and got out of his control. Log was overwhelmed with shock by the abnormality. He immediately nodded and answered, "Yes, I'm Log." The intruder nodded before staring intensely at Log. His powerful soul energy enveloped Log in an instant. Log's pupil disappeared and only the whites of his eyes could be seen. He seemed to have been frozen. "Who are you? What did you do to Log?" shouted Tyre as he stood up angrily. He was glaring at the intruder and ready to strike at any moment. Wasir and Asura got up from their seats and flanked the intruder from his left and right. They assumed hostile stances towards the person in preparation for attacking him. "You better not try to strike me, or I will end you." The person was slowly and thoroughly exploring Log with his soul, and yet, somehow, he could still talk. His tone was filled with utter arrogance and disdain, as though Tyre, Wasir, and Asura were puny ants that he could kill with a lift of his finger instead of mighty sovereigns of the fringe. Tyre had met plenty of haughty, conceited characters, but never someone as condescending as this unknown intruder. The usually calm-looking Tyre was infuriated by his attitude. He responded, "You think that this is a place that you can simply enter and leave alive, even if you are a hegemon of the God-Hunter Alliance? End us all? Haha, let's see it." Upon finishing those words, Tyre raised in preparation to launch an attack. "Tyre, stand down!" Log's pupils returned to his eyes, and a shiver traveled down his spine before he shouted those words just in time. He looked at the intruder with a frightened face, and in a slightly trembling voice, he asked, "Is there anything that I can help you with, Lord?" Tyre was stunned. He almost couldn't believe that the Log at this moment was the same person who he had known for ages. This infamously treacherous and vengeful sovereign had never used honorifics when speaking to another person or shown any fear towards any being. But the Log now was visibly frightened, and he spoke in a humble tone. "Tyre, do not attack," repeated Log as he slowly got up. Quickly, he turned to the intruder, bowed at him, and asked, "How may I serve you, Lord?" "Name me every cultivator of the death element in the fringe," asked the person unhurriedly after putting on a calm, faint smile. "Han Hao, Lung Chi, Perseus," replied Log respectfully after thinking for a moment. "And where are they?" asked the intruder after nodding his head. He seemed satisfied with Log's attitude. "I don't know where Han Hao is, but the others are located at," answered Log hastily while his body was still bowed. Good." The man turned on his heels and walked away after getting the information he wanted. He didn't even bother to look at Tyre, Wasir, or Asura. The room remained silent until long after the unknown intruder had left. Finally, Tyre looked at Log with a grave face and asked, "Who is he? Your father? Grandfather? Why would you be so respectful toward him?" After letting out a long sigh of relief, Log slouched on his seat. After taking his time to calm his mind down, he grimaced and replied, I wouldn't be that respectful to my father and grandfather. And if I were even remotely related to him, I wouldn't be living in the fringe now. Then, who in the world is he? Even the usually non-talkative Wazir couldn't help himself but ask. Over God, answered Log stutteringly as though it took a ton of effort to utter it. After taking a short pause to make sure that Tyre and the Order understood him, he added, and obviously not the half-assed kind of overgod that we are. Upon hearing those words, Tyre, Wazir, and Asura were stupefied. Shivers traveled down their spines. No wonder I should have guessed if wasn't him, Log wouldn't have been so humble, remarked Wazir, whose face seemed a little pale. I'm so glad that I've listened to you and not attacked. Tyre grimaced and continued. Otherwise, the fringe would have been flattened before those god hunters were even here. Why would he come to the fringe? What does he want? Asura seemed somewhat flustered. He mumbled to himself, could it be that the 12 existences intent to wipe out the fringe? How could this be? Log managed to fully calm down, and with a collected face, he gave his analysis. That is probably not his intention. Otherwise, the 4 of us would have already been dead. He should be after something else. After thinking for a moment with his eyes closed, Log explained. He seemed to be searching for something, or someone. His soul had explored every part of my body. There was nothing on me that I could hide from him. He likely did not find the thing that he's after and therefore spared me. I really hope that is the case. Otherwise, oblivion would fall upon us no matter what we do. Asura seemed somewhat pessimistic. He knew that even the combined might of the fringe stood no chance against such a mighty being. I think we should call it a day. We all need some time to calm down from that, said Tyre, ending the meeting decisively after seeing that the other 3 sovereigns no longer had the desire to talk about defending against the God Hunter alliance. Wazir, Log, and Asura agreed. Without Tyre saying another word, they left one after another. Even Log went home to suck his thumb instead of staying behind to have further discussion with Tyre. After all 3 of them left, Tyre sat quietly in the chamber for a long while before stealthily leaving the Omphalos. He went to the dead volcano, where Hanshu was first introduced to the sovereigns. He went behind a cliff, deployed a barrier, took out a magical mirror, and dialed Dhaka. Not far from the cliff, a ghostly figure was standing under the shadow of a tree, tracking Tyre Chapter 940, Brainstorming GDK 940. Brainstorming Tyre hadn't noticed that someone was spying on him when he produced the magical mirror to contact Dhaka. As soon as the image of Dhaka, leader of God Hunters, materialized upon the magical mirror, Tyre quickly asserted, Elder brother, there's been a change of situation. What's wrong? We are still in the process of forming an invasion plan over at my side. Why do you seem so frantic? Dhaka, inside the magical mirror, raised a brow and replied in his deep voice. One of the overgods just came to the fringe. Us 4 sovereigns nearly got wiped out. It seemed as though Tyre had yet to recover from the shock of being visited by the overgod of death. A tinge of anxiousness was laced in his voice as he spoke hurriedly. An overgod nearly killed you? What exactly happened? Although slightly taken aback, Dhaka did not seem too concerned. He had misheard or misunderstood Tyre. I did not say an overgod, I said the overgod, stressed a perturbed Tyre. What? Dhaka freaked out, finally realizing how truly pressing the problem was. He exclaimed, what are they doing in the land of chaos? Tyre gave a wry smile and recounted to Dhaka their encounter in detail. Dhaka's face grew more and more solemn as he listened to the narration. After a long while, he suddenly broke out in a depraved chuckle and muttered, ha ha ha, I know why he has come to the fringe. Ha ha, that's too bad for you, Dagmar, but I guess now you've got no hope of ever laying your hands on that thing. Dhaka continued cackling for a moment before turning serious again. There's no need for concern at all. The overgod of death is not after you sovereigns. All right, I will get my people to postpone the invasion until the overgod is done with his business here. His presence in the fringe brings too many uncertainties to us both and could affect the outcome of our master plan. After saying those words to calm Tyre, Dhaka revealed to him about the quintessence shard on Hanhao. Tyre was surprised by the revelation, but he also felt envious. He grumbled, they are such lucky bastards. He took a short pause before adding, Brian alone is already a real pain in the arse. And now with that Hanhao possessing a quintessence shard, he's going to be an even greater scourge. You must not reveal this information to anyone. Only me, Dagmar, and Acer know that Han Hao has a quintessence shard. Only me, Dagmar, and Acer know about this. If this gets leaked, our relationship could risk being exposed. Even as we speak, some are getting suspicious of me for being too cognizant of happenings within the fringe. To ensure that our master plan succeeds, we need to be mindful of our every move, warned Daka in his deep voice. Got it, Tyre nodded before he smilingly remarked. The fringe may be vast, but I don't believe it will take the overgod of death long to go through the names log gave him. Han Hao will eventually meet his doom? Yes, and all we gotta do is sit and wait, and keep an eye on Han Hao. Once he is dead or the overgod of death leaves the fringe, notify me immediately, and we will proceed with the invasion. When this is over, you will command the fringe while I command the Godhunter Alliance. With our powers combined, we will have a real shot at entering Eternia, said Daka. Tyre nodded and smiled. He then casually exchanged a few more words with Daka about the current situation before ending the call. Located not too far from Tyre was a wisp of smoke that gave off not the slightest aura of life. It wafted undetected into the distance. After moving 100 miles from Tyre, the wisp of smoke stopped and gradually morphed into Han Shuo. After spying and surveilling Tyre for nearly half a month, Han Shuo finally confirmed Sala's suspicion. Tyre, a sovereign, and Daka, a hegemon, were in fact brothers. Han Shuo was astonished by the discovery. Had Han Shuo remained oblivious to this fact when the war broke out, he would be in a dire situation. Both Tyre and Daka cultivated the energy of destruction. Given that Tyre was the strongest sovereign in the fringe, Daka, his elder brother, should possess even greater strength. The combined power of the two could be even more formidable than the combined might of Wasir, Asura, Log, and Salas. Han Shuo was fortunate to have been tipped off by Salas, which led to his discovery this day. With that knowledge, Han Shuo could now make the necessary preparations before the treacherous brothers dealt him the blow. What's more, Han Shuo could even make use of this information when scheming against them. With a plan in mind, Han Shuo didn't stay further and promptly returned to the pandemonium. The biggest challenge before him right now was not the Tyre and Daka brothers but Nestor, the overgod of death, who had come to the fringe. Han Shuo was aware of the reality that although his strength had been improving by leaps and bounds, he was far from being a match against the overgod of death. As Han Hao was among the names log reported to the overgod, it meant that Han Hao's life was now in great danger. Given the mighty power of the overgod of death, it would only be a matter of time before he located Han Hao hiding in the fringe. Han Shuo had to somehow find a way to keep little skeleton alive in the little time that was left. He returned to the pandemonium at top speed and immediately summoned Han Hao. Without delay, he informed Han Hao of this dire situation, then added, "We need to find a solution or he will find you eventually." After taking a short pause, Han Shuo continued, "You said that you've integrated with the quintessence shard. If the overgod of death were to stand next to you, would he be able to tell that you have it?" "Yes," Han Hao nodded after thinking for a moment. Han Shuo felt a great headache. He was certain that the overgod of death was now searching high and low for the death energy cultivators Log had named. Once he was done probing them, eventually, Han Hao would be the last person remaining on his list. The fringe was limited in size, but the might of the overgod was not. It wouldn't be long before he came knocking on their door. Even though the pandemonium was defended by layers upon layers of demonic formations, Han Shuo doubted that it could stop a quintessence overgod. With nowhere to hide and no way to fight, Han Shuo had no idea how to keep little skeleton alive. Han Hao, seeing the anxiousness on Han Shuo's face, thought for a moment before he suggested, "How about I leave the fringe and hide in other dominions temporarily?" "You can, but that will only be a temporary solution. If that guy can't find the shard in the fringe and realizes that you are coincidentally missing, you will be his #1 suspect. And when that happens, you will be in an even more dire situation," explained Han Shuo, grimacing in frustration. Han Hao did not reply but carefully thought about it for a while. And indeed, he could not come up with a good solution to the crisis. There was no way to truly resolve it unless he and Han Shuo could suddenly raise their strengths to the level of a quintessence overgod. As rapidly as Han Shuo had been progressing in demonic arts, he would still need centuries, if not millennia, to get to that level. And although Han Hao had just fused with a quintessence shard, it was still impossible for him to fight the Overgod. Even if Han Hao mastered using the shard's energy, there would still be no way he could fight the Overgod with the quintessence. Han Hao racked his brain, and he too could not come up with a solution. We need more brains to work on this so that we can come up with a solution as quickly as possible, remarked Han Shuo before immediately summoning those who knew about the shard's existence. When Ballins, Gilbert, Sanguis, Scarlet, and the 5 elite zombies were gathered at the underground gymnasium, Han Shuo hastily briefed them about Han Hao's dire situation before he gravely said, "Things are looking grim and we don't have much time, which is why I have called for this brainstorming session. Please try to come up with a solution." The atmosphere turned tense after the people realized the gravity of the situation. Just like Han Shuo, they bunched their brows and racked their brains for ideas. In this universe, an overgod with the quintessence was practically invincible. Save for other quintessence overgods, no existence in the universe could come close to even fighting them. And now, with this terrifying being hunting and searching for Han Hao, with the futility of fighting him, Han Hao could only try to run or hide. But even if Han Hao temporarily left, after crossing everyone off his list and not finding the shard in the fringe, the Overgod of Death would immediately consider the missing Han Hao as the primary suspect. By then, the Overgod would focus on hunting and killing Han Hao. It seemed to be an impossible challenge. A day went by in the blink of an eye. Although a few seemingly workable ideas were proposed, they were all dismissed after a round of scrutiny. Gradually, the discussions started to die down. The impatient Gilbert was starting to get restless. He argued that they might as well stake it all and fight the Overgod. "He can kill you with a lift of his finger. You can try, but you will die without a doubt," Han Shuo replied to Gilbert with a disapproving face. "I've already died once anyway. I don't mind dying once more," rebutted Gilbert. "His expertise is in the soul. If he kills you, he will be sure to annihilate your soul. And by then, no amount of power can bring you back to life. You will be dead permanently," said Han Shuo after snorting and rolling his eyes. "That guy is adept in the energy of souls. If you die this time, you won't be able to retain your soul temporarily like you did the previous time. Once he destroys the seal of your soul, I won't be able to resurrect you anymore no matter what, and by then, you will be finished for real." Han Shuo glimpsed at Gilbert and snorted coldly. "Senior, that reminds me, can Han Hao separate his soul from his body and possess another body? This body of his had fused with the shard, but if you forge him a new divine body and let him possess it, the Overgod wouldn't find any trace of the shard on him, right?" Bolin's eyes lit up as if inspired by Gilbert's words. Han Shuo was jolted and he opened his eyes wide. Immediately, he turned to Han Hao and asked, "You've been practicing demonic arts, and your soul is different from an ordinary being. Are you able to separate your soul from your body?" Han Hao thought about it for a moment and vaguely attempted it. He nodded, "I think I can." Chapter 941, Cheating Death GDK 941. Cheating Death Han Shuo could easily fabricate a new divine body with the exact appearance of Hao Hao. As long as Hao Hao could separate his soul from his original body, he could possess the new body and use it to fool the Overgod of Death. Upon hearing that Han Hao could do it, Gilbert, Ballins, and the others became elated. Among them, Scarlet was especially excited and relieved that they'd found a workable solution. She asked Han Hao, "Are you sure you can do it? Will it have any adverse effects?" Han Hao nodded and Scarlet confidently and replied, "I will be just fine." "Perfect, then this can be done with ease," exclaimed Han Shuo smilingly before he instructed Han Hao. "Then let us get started right away, there is no time to waste. Come and select the materials with me. I will need the skeleton of a high god and some special medicinal ingredients. With those things, I can build you a new body without much effort." "Father, there is still another problem." After hesitating for a bit, Han Hao bunched his brows and said, "A portion of the shard has fused with my body, and its inscriptions have interwoven with my soul. I'm worried that he will be able to detect the inscriptions on my soul. All you need to do is split up a strand of your soul. I will teach you how to solve this." As Han Shuo now had a direction, it did not take him long to think of a solution to this potential issue. Through demonic arts, Han Shuo could split his consciousness into millions of strands. If Han Hao could separate his soul from his body, then splitting a strand of his soul should also be achievable. Han Shuo could then help him form a secondary soul similar to an avatar. While thinking about the solution, another new idea came to Han Shuo's mind. He smilingly said, "Don't worry, this one is easy to solve. I will help you form a secondary soul and use it to possess the surrogate body. When the Overgod comes, let him probe your secondary soul and surrogate body. Then, have your main body activate the shard outside the fringe. He wouldn't suspect a thing." "Father, what do you mean by a secondary soul?" asked Han Hao, who seemed a little perplexed. "Well, it's like this," said Han Shuo with a big smile as his two avatars that had been sitting inside the cauldron of Myriad Demon emerged. Two carbon copies of Han Shuo suddenly appeared beside him. They looked exactly the same in their appearances and demeanor. Han Hao carefully examined the two avatars for a while before he nodded and said, "I understand now." The 5 elite zombies, Gilbert and Sanguis, knew that Han Shuo had avatars, but Scarlet and Ballins were unaware of the secret. They were astonished to see 2 clones of Han Shuo suddenly standing before them, and they could not be more curious. Han Shuo, however, did not explain much to them. He said to Han Hao, "Let's not tarry any longer. Soon I will teach you the techniques. You can be at ease. This surrogate of you will have the same soul undulation of your main body, but it will not carry the aura of the quintessence shard. I'm sure that the Overgod won't be able to tell that it's a fake." Han Hao seemed rather excited. Han Shuo had gained the 2 avatars mostly by luck. But now that he had attained Skybreak Realm, and having obtained new memories and insights into demonic arts, Han Shuo was finally able to forge an avatar completely from scratch, which was why he was so confident that it would work. Han Shuo and Han Hao went to the warehouse in the Pandemonium, and they selected the materials needed for forging a surrogate body. A number of eerie white bones and sparkling, translucent rocks were taken. The warehouse stored all kinds of valuable and uncommon materials. A portion of them were leftovers from constructing the Pandemonium, while most of them were spoils Han Hao looted from the Omphalos merchants. All kinds of miraculous and rare materials were piled in those rooms. He had more than enough to forge even 10 more avatars for Han Hao. Refining an avatar would take a long time that we do not have. Besides, even with an avatar, it wouldn't help with anything if the Overgod decides to slaughter the other you. Therefore, I will just make you a puppet, but it's good enough to fool him. This will save us a ton of time and energy. After gathering all the necessary materials, Han Shuo brought Han Hao to the surface of the Pandemonium and began forging a new body using one of the available demonic formations. While Han Shuo's main body was busy manufacturing a new body, his avatar was teaching Han Hao how to split up a strand of his soul. As Han Hao was a demonic arts cultivator, and his soul was mostly similar to that of a human, with Han Shuo's guidance, he very quickly mastered the technique. Han Hao tried and tried again. In just 3 days' time, he was able to split up a strand of his soul as Han Shuo wanted. It was way faster than Han Shuo thought. "Excellent, excellent!" Han Shuo was overjoyed and was pleased by Han Hao's extraordinary talent in demonic techniques. He said, "Now that you have a strand of your soul separated, the hardest step is completed. All you have to do now is sever the strand from your main soul while keeping it entangled with your soul. Here's how you do it." On the surface of the Pandemonium, Han Shuo's main body continued to inject demonic yuan and work with the cauldron of Myriad Demon to build the surrogate, while his avatar of destruction described the steps of forming a secondary soul to Han Hao. Simultaneously, Han Shuo's avatar of death was at the underground palace. He had been updating himself on the latest news in the fringe from Zavik. 5 were visited by the Overgod, and 3 of them were killed. The 2 came out unscathed because they did not try to resist. Zavik, standing respectfully before Han Shuo, reported with a solemn face. Han Shuo asked Zavik to keep an eye on those names log mentioned to the Overgod. Half of those element of death experts had the Overgod of death knocking on their doors. Some of those fringe dwellers, oblivious to the identity of their mysterious visitor, used to being arrogant and snobbish, were taken out by the Overgod. Meanwhile, those who sensed the terrifying might of the Overgod and who were as meekly prostrated as Log was were spared. "How many are left?" asked Han Shuo with his brows bunched gravely. 5 more. I believe that after he visited those 5, he will focus on finding Han Hao. It wouldn't be long. Should we do anything to prepare? Asked Zavik. Han Shuo thought for a while before instructing. Now is a sensitive period for these prominent energy of death experts to die. It will surely cause a ruckus. Use your resources to spread a rumor that there is a god hunter hunting for experts cultivating the death energy. Exaggerate the hunter's strength as much as possible, but don't mention anything about a quintessence over God. And make sure that the remaining 5 hear the rumor while not revealing that it originated from us. Is this to frighten them so that they will go into hiding, thus increasing the time before they would be found? Zavik immediately understood Han Shuo's plan. Han Shuo nodded and replied, "That's correct. It's to buy us a little more time. The solution I'm working on will be ready soon. By then, the surrogate Han Hao will head to the Omphalos where everyone recognizes him and the overgod can be sure of his identity." At this most critical moment, Han Shuo needed the most accurate and relevant information from him and therefore revealed the great secret to Zavik. Besides, given Zavik's history in serving his House of Han for many years with undying loyalty, Han Shuo trusted that he would keep a tight lip about the secret and perform his best. "Understood, I will have it done right away," replied Zavik, nodding before quickly leaving. Yet another 3 days had passed. The Han Shuo, sitting inside the gymnasium on the surface of the pandemonium, took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He put his arm into the pool of blood before him and pulled out a body. It was a carbon copy of Han Hao. "Are you ready?" Han Shuo asked Han Hao solemnly. "I'm ready," answered Han Hao. He seemed calm and not the slightest bit nervous. Han Shuo nodded and smilingly said, "Sometimes I wonder if you ever know what fear is. All right, you may begin. Possess the body with your secondary soul. I can only help you this far, and the rest is up to you." Han Hao did not waste words. He sat cross-legged on the ground and stared fixedly at his surrogate body with his bewitching purple eyes. A trace of faintly discernible soul undulation formed above his head and slowly drifted to the lifeless clone of his. The strange shimmer in his eyes grew brighter and brighter before it suddenly stopped wavering, as though Han Hao was in a suspended state. Han Shuo grew worried. He kept watching back and forth at Han Hao's main body and the surrogate. He became more and more anxious when things seemed to be taking too long. After a long while, the strange light flashed in Han Hao's purple eyes before he slowly closed his eyes. Meanwhile, the surrogate before him opened his eyes and slowly got up. He moved his arms and legs around curiously and said, "Father, it's done." Han Shuo was relieved and elated. He laughed out loud and said, "Good, very good, now comes the fun part. You are going to cheat death." Chapter 942, You Hit It. GDK 942, You Hit It. Han Shuo brought the 2 Han Haos to the underground palace. The others, including the 5 elite zombies and Balins, could not be more amazed. They used their souls to thoroughly examine both of the Han Haos, but were shocked to discover that not only did they look exactly the same, their auras were almost indistinguishable. They could sense a unique aura of death inside the main soul of Han Hao. As his main soul contains the power of the quintessence shard, the 2 souls cannot have the exact same aura. But the overgod of death will not be able to tell that this is just a surrogate, said Han Shuo confidently. "Father, should I go now?" asked both Han Haos in one voice. They had the same pitch and inflection. As Han Hao was still not used to having 2 bodies, he still could not control them independently like Han Shuo could with his avatars. "Yes, go now. Leave the fringe with your main body and head to the Omphalos with your surrogate. Remember to bring your followers along. Go explore the parameters yourself until the overgod finds you," said Han Shuo smilingly. "Understood," nodded Han Hao. He said his goodbyes to Scarlet and the 5 elite zombies before leaving through an underground tunnel of the pandemonium, commencing the plot to cheat death. Han Shuo did not leave to the Omphalos with Han Hao, as he did not wish to meet the overgod of death at this stage. Besides, Han Shuo had killed City Lord Hill of Witherbone City, an important servant of the overgod. A meeting with the overgod might not end well for Han Shuo. If you can, please consider supporting the translation project. You'll get advanced chapters. In addition, the Han Hao heading to the Omphalos was just a disposable surrogate. It wouldn't cause any adverse effect on Han Hao's main body, even if the overgod annihilated the surrogate. This put Han Shu much more at ease about letting little skeleton go on the mission alone. As soon as Han Hao left, Ballins, Sanguis, and Gilbert immediately went to Han Shuo excitedly to ask about avatars. They were very interested in what they saw, and they too wanted surrogates of their own. Unfortunately, Han Shuo had to douse their enthusiasm. As Ballins and Sanguis did not cultivate the orthodox school of demonic arts, they could not branch out a stand of their souls. Gilbert, however, could do so as he was taught the demonic techniques in tempering his soul. However, it could be said that the current body of Gilbert was already a surrogate body which had become well attached to his soul, not to mention the extreme robustness of the body. Therefore, it was pointless to spend time and energy forging another surrogate. Han Shu denied their requests and urged them to put their effort into their cultivations instead of distracting themselves with getting a clone. The trio did not feel too dejected. Gilbert immediately returned to cultivating and meditating. He had learned a great deal from Han Hao and now saw the direction on how he should fuse the two energies in his body. He was confident that he would make great progress very soon. Meanwhile, perhaps shocked or inspired by the strength they saw in Han Hao, Sanguis and Ballins became even more focused on their cultivations than they already were. They continued to advance at an incredible rate. With the God Hunter alliance now on the border of the fringe, they were prepared to invade at any moment. Han Shuo was not at liberty to be careless. Ever since Han Hao departed, Han Shuo frequently met with Zavik to keep up to date about the latest situation and their battle plan. Han Shuo would also mysteriously disappear from the pandemonium unexplained. He seemed to be setting something up in secret. 2 weeks passed in a snap. Han Shuo had been counting the days and thought that by now, Han Hao's main body should have left the fringe while his surrogate body would have reached the Omphalos. He started feeling somewhat worried, wondering how the situation was at the Omphalos. Over at the Omphalos, Han Hao with a group of his god hunters formally stepped into the Omphalos. With his most grandiose and ostentatious party, he wandered all around the major streets and shopped for unique materials. This surrogate body of Han Hao's was in the vicinity of the Omphalos as early as 5 days ago. However, as his main body had yet to reach his destination, he hid and waited. It was only today, when surrogate Han Hao sensed that the main Han Hao had entered the Destiny Dominion, that he entered the Omphalos. Han Hao's sudden appearance in the trading city had alerted the major powerhouses, especially Tyre, who knew that he possessed the quintessence shard. Tyre immediately ordered his men to furtively keep Han Hao under constant surveillance while disseminating his whereabouts using stringers. At present, Han Hao's reputation in the fringe was barely beneath the 5 sovereigns. Fringe dwellers and the various forces were naturally curious when someone as powerful as Han Hao showed up in the Omphalos. They too silently observed every move he made. Asura was the first to come to Han Hao. After bringing Han Hao to one of his sovereign shops and deploying multiple boundaries around themselves, Asura bunched his brows and asked, "Why have you come to the Omphalos?" Asura knew that Han Hao and Han Shuo were very close and that he should also express his goodwill to Han Hao. When the sovereigns were visited by the overgod of death, Asura had heard with his own ears the names Log reported. Through his own intelligence network, Asura was aware that some of those in the name list had been murdered. He had also relayed that news to Zavik via secret channels. Given just how dangerous the situation was, Asura couldn't understand why Han Hao would appear in the public now. "I have some businesses to do here. I'm not the person he's looking for. I will be fine." Although Han Hao's skills in interaction were primitive, especially in romantic relationships, he knew enough to feign civility with a character like Asura. "Not you. Are you sure?" asked Asura suspiciously after thinking for a moment. Although Asura had no idea what really was happening, from the clues he had gathered so far, he could be certain that the overgod of death was looking for someone or something. "It's not me," reaffirmed Han Hao. "All right then." Asura nodded and suddenly changed the topic. "How is Brian doing recently? I have sent multiple messengers inviting him to the Omphalos for discussion. Why has he not replied?" "He's in a critical stage of his secluded cultivation, but you don't have to worry, he has made all the necessary preparations. There wouldn't be an issue even if the God Hunter Alliance strikes now," answered Han Hao immediately. He had prepared those answers in advance with Han Shuo. Asura then asked a few more questions about Han Shuo, which were answered almost spontaneously by Han Hao. He did not reveal any secrets related to the pandemonium, but did a good job of not appearing as though he was trying to hide information from Asura. Asura could not obtain the answer he wanted from Han Hao. After seeing that Han Hao seemed not in the least worried about the overgod of death visiting him and was determined to stay inside the fringe, Asura did not continue to persuade him otherwise. Not hoping to meet the overgod of death a second time, Asura did not bother Han Hao for too long. He advised Han Hao to not resist if the overgod visits him and wished him luck. Han Hao thanked Asura before leaving his sovereign's shop with an indifferent face. He continued roaming around the Omphalos, waiting for Nestor to get him. Around 3 days later, Han Hao, followed by Polo and the gang, went shopping at a store that sold certain unique bones. One by one, he scanned all the oddly shaped bones containing strange energies that the merchant had. As a cultivator of the death energy, Han Hao had a hobby of collecting all kinds of unique bones. It was a hobby of his to forge weapons out of bones. He needed just one look to determine the quality of a bone and if it was suitable to be turned into a weapon. Needless to say, the shop owner was aware of Han Hao's identity, and he was incredibly respectful towards him. When presenting his highest quality products to Han Hao, the merchant wore the most sincere smile on his face and treated him with utmost courtesy. After hours of shopping, Han Hao dropped a dozen or so bones on the counter and asked the merchant, who had been running all around the shop tirelessly the entire time, "I'm taking these. How many crystal coins do they cost?" The merchant bared his palms, put on a flattering smile, and said, "How would I dare take your crystal coins, Lord? Please, you may have them all free of charge." Han Hao stared blankly for a moment. He raised a brow and asked, Why won't you take my crystal coins? Don't tell me you're actually running a charity." "No, Lord, it is a gift only for you. You may come any time and take anything in this shop." We would be extremely grateful if in return your lordship would spare us in the future," said the merchant in an awkward and somewhat nervous smile. Han Hao was rather baffled, and he looked at the merchant with puzzled eyes. He didn't seem to quite catch the merchant's meaning. At this moment, Polo, who was standing beside Han Hao, chuckled mischievously before whispering into Han Hao's ear, "A few years ago, Chief instructed us to intercept all the goods flowing into the Omphalos. This is one of the merchants we looted." Han Hao immediately realized what was going on after hearing Polo's words. Back then, Tyre and Log were finding excuses to prevent Han Shu from joining their ranks and control a part of the Omphalos. They commanded the Omphalos merchants under their influence to oppose Han Shu's installment as one of the city's rulers. In response, Han Shu had Han Hao loot all the merchandise going into the Omphalos, shutting down their businesses. "Oh, thanks then," said Han Hao indifferently as he nodded. He casually took away those bones and left with Polo and the gang. Suddenly, the moment he stepped out the front door, Han Hao jolted, for he felt as though someone had locked onto him. Although this body was just a surrogate body that was nowhere as good as an avatar or his main body, Han Hao's secondary soul still possessed the acute sensing power of his main soul. He immediately knew that something was going to happen. And just as expected, a misty cloud of death energy enveloping a dark figure stealthily emerged from a corner of the street and shot towards him at incredible speed. As the shadow approached Han Hao, out of nowhere, the energies of lightning, destruction, and darkness appeared around him to block Han Hao's every escape path. "You're finally here," thought Han Hao. He stood tall on his ground, without moving, quietly waiting for the energy of death to get to him. He seemed prepared to allow the overgod to probe him without giving any resistance. But out of Han Hao's expectations, the figure shrouded by a cloud of mist suddenly stopped, and a cold voice sounded, "Trap him!" "Dagmar!" exclaimed Han Hao before he hastily retreated, instantly flying back into the shop he just came out from. He instructed, "Polo, disperse and shout." Han Hao was very surprised. He did not expect that instead of Nestor the overgod of death, the visitor was Dagmar, the Godhunter Alliance's hegemon of death. They were at the Omphalos, the center of the fringe. Tyre, Log, Asura, Wasir, as well as the leaders of various major factions, were in the Omphalos at that time. It was lunacy for Dagmar to come and strike him at the Omphalos. Dagmar cultivated the energy of death and had a much more profound mastery of the soul than an ordinary expert. It was indeed possible for Dagmar to conceal his presence from the sovereigns and sneak into the omphalos. Han Hao was between laughter and tears after baiting for the overgod of death for many days, but it was Dagmar who was obsessed with the shard that showed up. While immediately retreating into the shop, Han Hao did not forget to give Polo instructions. The God Hunter Alliance is here. The God Hunter Alliance is attacking. Needless to say, Polo was aware of Dagmar's identity. Having worked under Han Hao for many years, he knew exactly what he had to do at this moment. He cried for help while escaping with his gang. "There's no escape this time, Han Hao," shouted Dagmar in his sinister voice. Multiple shadows appeared from all around Han Hao and surrounded him. Dagmar, however, instead of going after Han Hao, waved his hand to trap Polo and the others in bone cages. After his previous encounter with Han Hao, Dagmar learned to be cautious of the shard's miraculous power. He was afraid of being affected by the gravestone again. It was for this reason that Dagmar had kept a distance from Han Hao. Naturally, Dagmar had no idea that this was just a surrogate body of Han Hao's that did not carry the quintessence shard. He would keep Han Hao's followers trapped while having his experts who don't cultivate the energy of death to encircle Han Hao. "You still can't kill me," shouted Han Hao after jumping out from the back window of the shop. He then threw a handful of the pearls of annihilation in every direction. Kaboom, 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 tremendous explosions that shook the entire city erupted. Those henchmen of Dagmar's had to temporarily stop advancing to shield themselves from the blast. One of the experts who were much further ahead of the others was shredded into smithereens. It was instant death. Afraid that the surrogate Han Hao might get attacked while traveling to the omphalos, Han Xiu gave him half of the pearls of annihilation he had. This surrogate body of Han Hao's was rather weak, and it could not unleash much power as it was made in haste. However, as the secondary soul inherited the properties and memories of the main soul, it could activate the pearls of annihilation without any trouble. In an instant, the violent explosion destroyed several dozen shops in the vicinity. Rubbles, wood chips, broken crystals, and dust were sent flying everywhere. All the merchants, sales clerks, and shoppers in the area became collateral casualties. Dagmar emerged from the cloud of dust and yelled, "Hurry, seize him, we don't have much time." He flicked his fingers and sent strands of the energy of death into the bone cages, trapping Polo and the others. The spiky bone cages started shrinking and piercing through their bodies. Given that Dagmar was an overgod expert, it came as no surprise that Polo and the others stood no chance against him. Polo and the others would have been dead long ago if Dagmar had not been so focused on Han Hao. Through Dagmar's mad shouting, those devoted followers of his dauntlessly braved through the explosions and continued to charge at Han Hao. It seemed as though they were determined to kill Han Hao even at the cost of their own lives. The pearls of annihilation could not instantly kill all those experts Dagmar brought, as all of them possessed late-stage high god strengths. This half-made avatar body of Han Hao's was no match against the group of high gods. With them now charging ahead without regard for their own lives, Han Hao also could not outrun them. However, Han Hao wasn't all too worried. He knew that even if this surrogate body was destroyed, it would have no effect on his main body. Besides, if he was killed in the omphalos, the overgod would no longer hunt for him. Although this would be different from the original plan, it still accomplished the original objective. 5 shadows suddenly gathered around Han Hao and intercepted him. Immediately after, 5 energies bound his body, not allowing him to budge. "Hegemon, we've restrained him," cried one of Dagmar's followers. Dagmar was overjoyed, and he was shaking in excitement. He stopped injecting his energy of death into the bone cages that were about to pierce Polo and the others to death. Instantly, he landed before Han Hao and put a hand on Han Hao's chest. "Yes, my precious, I will finally have you," mumbled Dagmar foolishly as he caressed Han Hao's chest. Then, with his sharp, white fingernails, he stabbed Han Hao in the chest. "Chhhkkk?" He pushed his hand deeper into the surrogate body's chest excitedly, as though he wanted to rip Han Hao's chest out for the quintessence shard. But suddenly, Dagmar stopped. He turned furious. He stared at Han Hao and bawled, "It's not there. Why is it not there? You hid it. Where have you hidden it? Give it to me, give it to me." Chapter 943, Just Kill Me GDK 943. Just Kill Me Dagmar had recklessly intruded on the Omphalos, even when 4 of the sovereigns were present. His greed and obsession with the quintessence shard had consumed all his rationality, so much so that he was willing to sacrifice these elite experts of his, and even putting himself at risk of being severely injured or killed. It was obvious how angry and frustrated Dagmar must have felt after staking it all to only discover that the quintessence shard was not on Han Hao. His face turned from excited to flushed red with anger and exasperation. He grabbed Han Hao on his collar, shook him violently, and shouted, "Give it to me, give it to me." Han Hao wore an indifferent face as he stared at the Dagmar throwing a fit. There was not a trace of happiness, sadness, shock, or fear. It was as though the person Dagmar captured wasn't Han Hao but a cold bystander. "Hegemon, they are coming, hurry," reminded one of Dagmar's henchmen anxiously. From the loud screams coming from the distance, it was obvious that experts from all over the Omphalos were gathering towards them. They would be surrounded in just moments. "Han Hao, hand it to me and I won't kill you. I promise I won't kill you." Dagmar offered a bargain while grabbing Han Hao tightly. Desperation could be seen in his bloodshot eyes and heard in his voice. "Just kill me," replied Han Hao without any emotions. "You really want to die?" roared Dagmar, his eyelids twitching. He was internally debating whether he should destroy Han Hao or forcing him to reveal the shard's location. "Hegemon, we have no time," shouted Dagmar's henchman again. It almost sounded as though he was crying. They had stayed inside the Omphalos far longer than they had planned, and Dagmar seemed to still be completely unaware of how much time had passed. "Fine, as you wish," bellowed Dagmar. He gritted his teeth and assembled his divine energy to deal the killing blow. It was at this moment that suddenly a frigid aura flooded every inch of the region. Streams of frigid air came out of nowhere and entered Dagmar in an instant, covering him in a layer of snow-white frost. The frigid energy had immediately made Dagmar's movements extremely sluggish and prevented him from fully activating the energy in his body. Then, immediately after, those streams of frigid air spread from Dagmar and towards his henchmen, shattering the incorporeal chain that restrained Han Hao while leaving a trail of frozen objects. Those frigid air streams seemed as though they were alive. They affected Dagmar, his henchmen, and even lifeless objects in the environment. However, for some reason, those frigid energies did not affect Han Hao just inches away from Dagmar. Han Hao was ready to let Dagmar end the life of his surrogate. But the instant he sensed that Dagmar had been frozen and the energy restraining him removed, he escaped for his life at his top speed. Although Dagmar had inserted a hand into Han Hao's chest, it wasn't damaging enough to kill Han Hao. Dagmar's only objective was the quintessence shard. When he discovered that the quintessence shard was not on Han Hao, he immediately pulled out the hand instead of completely destroying Han Hao's body. But even if Dagmar were to shatter every organ in the surrogate body, the surrogate Han Hao could still survive. This unique body manufactured by Han Shuo, unlike an ordinary body, could continue to function without its organs. "Dagmar, how dare you intrude the Omphalos? Meet your doom!" A chilling and cold shout sounded. Sovereign Wazir was the first to arrive at the scene, and he freed Han Hao from Dagmar without delay. Wazir had reached Dagmar as he spoke. His massive domain of divinity instantly enveloped the region, causing the environment to suddenly plunge below 0 kelvins. Even the ground was immediately frozen, and it made eerie cracking noises. Wazir's frigid energy couldn't have entered Dagmar's body if he had remained alert to his surroundings, instead of being engrossed with getting Han Hao to surrender the quintessence shard. But fortunately for Dagmar, he was also an over-god who was famous among the God-Hunter Alliance for his formidable strength. Although Wazir's frigid energy had injured him, it had also woke him to the grim situation. After several cycles of circulating the energy of death in his body, Dagmar managed to purge Wazir's frigid aura from his body. With a wave of his hand, the element of death in the Omphalos rapidly converged in the region. A thin gray mist appeared and neutralized the frigid aura, causing the temperatures to rise somewhat. "Hegemon, run!" shouted one of Dagmar's henchmen at the top of his lungs. It was obvious that Dagmar had now woken up and understood the grave situation they were in. He could sense that Asura was rushing to the scene. He also vaguely registered Tyre and Log's auras, indicating that they were not far away. If Dagmar could not escape before the four sovereigns assembled, he would most likely have to stay in the Omphalos for good. Dagmar gritted his teeth and took out a green crystal ball, shouting, "Abandon your body. Get your soul inside." Those followers of Dagmar were elated. Without any hesitation, they abandoned their divine bodies and flew their divine souls into the green crystal ball in Dagmar's hand. Immediately after, Dagmar waved his unoccupied hand and released strands of his energy of death into the now soulless bodies of his followers. Suddenly, those divine bodies started rapidly inflating like balloons as dreadful energy brewed inside them. Their shapes slowly turned round as their faces became distorted and unrecognizable. Wasir, who was planning to do everything within his means to obstruct Dagmar, jolted when he saw the inflating divine bodies that were rising to the sky. He suddenly retreated and shouted, "Get cover!" Han Hao, who was located not too far from Dagmar, had immediately sought cover when he saw those bodies bizarrely rising to the sky. As a cultivator of the death energy, Han Hao could immediately recognize that Dagmar was deploying corpse explosion on those high god divine bodies. He ran faster than everyone, and soon after Wasir's warning sounded, those divine bodies of Dagmar's followers violently exploded, releasing an immense burst of the energy of death and tore an opening on the domed barrier covering the Omphalos. Dagmar, with the green crystal ball in his hand, immediately flew through the small opening and escaped. "After him!" shouted Wasir after raising his head and looked at the sky. Along with Wasir, 3 trails simultaneously soared to the sky. The barrier covering the Omphalos seemed to pose no obstruction to them. They flew through the barrier and vanished in a flash. Han Hao looked at the sky and memorized the other 3 sovereigns' flight paths. After Wasir, Asura was the closest to the crime scene at several kilometers. Tyre and Log, meanwhile, were about 50 kilometers away. Han Hao computed in his mind for a moment and deduced that Tyre and Log should have been the closest to him instead of Wasir and Asura. Why would Wasir rush here so quickly? Why did he help me? Han Hao felt somewhat perplexed. He could tell that Wasir had gone out of his way to protect him. If Wasir had not reached there in time, froze Dagmar, and unshackled him, this surrogate body of Han Hao's would have been shattered by Dagmar. Wasir could have attacked Dagmar indiscriminately, without giving any thought to Han Hao's presence, instead of selectively freezing Dagmar, without affecting Han Hao, who was just inches away. Even if Han Hao was injured or killed, the fault would be on Dagmar and not Wasir. Han Hao was not aware of any friendly relations between Wasir and the House of Han. If anything, Wasir should be antagonistic to him, as Wasir was once defeated by Han Xiu at the volcanic crater. While Han Hao bunched his brows and pondered, Polo broke free from Dagmar's bone prison. With his own body still drenched in his own blood, he anxiously asked, "Chief, are you all right?" Han Hao temporarily paused his speculating and calmly replied, "I'm fine. What about you guys?" Dagmar was quickly distracted and had stopped applying their energy on us early in the attack. "We suffered only minor injuries," replied Polo in a relaxed manner. He did not seem to be in pain. Having lived in the fringe for such a long time and being a god hunter, those injuries were too artificial to bother Polo. "Good to hear that. Let's rest," said Han Hao after nodding. He then sat cross-legged right where he was even though the sovereigns were still pursuing Dagmar. Polo and the gang followed the action of their leader. They too sat cross-legged as though the rubbled zone was a gymnasium, stopped their wounds from bleeding, and began recovering the energy they had just exhausted. They were making the most of their time to stabilize their injuries and recover their strengths. This was something they had learned from Han Hao after becoming his followers. It became their standard to always maintain their strengths at peak conditions, no matter where or when. Han Hao thought that the surrogate body of his could not be of any help, and therefore did not join the sovereigns in pursuing Dagmar. And from the fact that Dagmar had decisively deployed corpse explosion on the divine bodies of his top-notch experts, Han Hao could tell that Dagmar must have more tricks up his sleeves. Tyre and Log did not rush to the scene immediately because they wanted Han Hao to be killed by Dagmar. Therefore, the sovereigns were unable to surround and trap Dagmar. Han Hao thought it likely that Dagmar could shake off the sovereign's pursuit. The surrogate Han Hao continued to analyze what had happened instead of healing his injuries, as the body was made to be disposed of, and that the injuries were not life-threatening. Besides, after the ordeal is over, Han Hao's secondary soul will abandon this surrogate body and rejoin his main soul. Therefore, Han Hao wasn't going to waste his effort in repairing this body. Why would Wasir help me? Why is it that Asura was slower than Wasir? A series of questions popped up in Han Hao's mind as he pondered with his brows bunched. Time went by quickly and quietly. After arriving at the scene, the fringe dwellers in the Omphalos discovered that Dagmar had vanished and that Han Hao was sitting on the ground with rubbles all around him. When they saw that blood seemed to be flowing out from his chest, they started having certain ideas. Some of them had sinister lights in their eyes when they looked at Han Hao. Having grown and expanded his forces and territories in the fringe for such a long time, Han Hao lost count of how many fringe dwellers he had offended. On usual days, afraid of his formidable power, his enemies wouldn't dare touch him. But it was obvious that Han Hao was now severely injured. Even his henchmen were drenched in their own blood. It was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity to strike. Those leaders of big and small factions were unaware of Han Hao and Han Shu's relationship. They stayed around and quietly gazed at Han Hao and his follower with ferocious eyes. The Omphalos has its rules, and I couldn't recall any fringe dwellers breaking those rules. Hee, do you bunch want to be the first? Challenged Polo in a scornful smirk after sweeping his eyes at those watching them ferociously. Han Hao, meanwhile, spoke not a word. He shut his eyes as though they were too insignificant to pose him any threat. After hearing Polo's remark, the crowd started to quietly disperse. They clearly realized that attacking someone in the Omphalos wasn't a good idea. It would mean making enemies with all 5 sovereigns, and it wouldn't end up well for themselves, especially during such a sensitive period. It did not take long before all the stalkers and onlookers dispersed, leaving Han Hao and his gang alone in the rubble fields scattered with body parts of merchants. But at this moment, a figure gradually appeared in the settling clouds of dust, walking towards Han Hao unhurriedly. Polo smirked coldly and suddenly stood up. In a malevolent voice, he said, "It seems that some people just aren't afraid of death." Polo had only suffered minor injuries, and he was a late-stage high god. Other than the 5 sovereigns and Han Hao, there was no expert in the Omphalos he was afraid of. Besides, many of his comrades had suffered just minor injuries. Polo was confident in winning even if those dispersed stalkers had attacked. To Polo, this solo attacker stood no chance. A tall, handsome man gradually emerged. The comer looked calmly at Han Hao, who had now suddenly opened his eyes. He had a complete disregard for Polo and the others glaring at him as he smilingly asked, "Are you Han Hao?" "Who are you?" shouted Polo, who was ready to strike. "Polo, stand down," instructed Han Hao suddenly. After making sure that Polo and the others understood his command, he looked at the comer with an emotionless face, nodded, and replied, "I am Han Hao." Well, it appears that you already know who I am." "Excellent, I get to save some effort," remarked the handsome man smilingly. Then, an immense soul undulation suddenly spread from his body and enveloped Han Hao in an instant. Chapter 944, Han Hao vs. Endrina GDK 944. Han Hao vs. Endrina. After examining Han Hao for several dozen seconds, the mysterious and handsome man shook his head disappointedly, let out a soft sigh, and murmured to himself, "Not this one either." He turned around and vanished in the cloud of dust. Soon, Tyre, Wasir, Log, and Asura returned to the Omphalos. Just as Han Hao expected, they failed to capture Dagmar. After Dagmar flew out of the Omphalos, there were no longer any boundary or energy towers stopping him from using a portal scroll. By the time that the 4 sovereigns found Dagmar, he had already crossed the spacetime tunnel, and the spacetime fissure was gradually fusing back together. The 4 were a tad late and could only watch as Dagmar escaped. But nonetheless, Dagmar had paid a hefty price for his reckless intrusion of the Omphalos. The divine bodies of nearly all his most elite high gods were annihilated, and he had suffered injuries after Wasir's frigid aura entered his body. After this incident, Dagmar's power and forces had sharply declined. It could even be said that Dagmar would no longer be much of a threat to the sovereigns in the coming war for the Fringe. Dagmar suffered the consequences he deserved for his irrational and foolish actions. By the time that the four sovereigns returned to Han Hao, Nestor, the over-god of death, had left the area disappointedly. They did not know that Nestor had visited Han Hao while they were away. No matter the grudges between them, as the sovereigns, it was only proper that they visit the fringe dweller victim of an attack carried out by an outsider inside the Omphalos. Han Hao, are you all right? Asked Asura. He appeared as though he was very worried. I'm fine. Did you guys get Dagmar? Although it was obvious from the dejected looks on their faces that they had failed, Han Hao knew enough of societal norms to ask the obvious. Asura shook his head in a grimace before he sighed and said, Dagmar is so ruthless that he would sacrifice the bodies of his followers. The corpse explosion deployed on multiple high god divine bodies was powerful enough to cause a crack on the barrier around Omphalos, allowing him to escape. Otherwise, we would have surrounded him and he definitely wouldn't still be alive now. Oh, what a shame. If only some of you had come to the scene sooner, said Han Hao as he glanced at Tyre and Log. He then said to Asura, but anyway, a really strange guy came to me just now. He examined me thoroughly with his soul before leaving and shaking his head. I wonder who he is. Tyre and Log's face simultaneously jolted and the two exchanged looks. Log then put on a mischievous smirk and asked Han Hao, a guy probes you with his soul but leaves without a scratch. That is very strange indeed. I'm very surprised to learn that. Since when have you turned into a pacifist? Wasir and Asura turned their attention to Han Hao. They too were very interested in the matter. Well, I have no clue who that guy is, but I can be certain that his command of the death energy surpasses even yours. Han Hao looked at Log with an emotionless face as he calmly said, I know that I have no way of resisting such a mighty existence, and thus silent cooperation is my only option. I've heard that Lord Log was also visited by a very powerful stranger. I could not be sure of the merits of rumors, but it sounded as though Lord Log was much more cooperative than I was. Log's face turned rather dark after hearing Han Hao's comeback. He let out a cold groan but did not reply. Log knew from Han Hao's words that the mysterious visitor was the overgod of death. As he had not learned from Tyre that Han Hao possessed the quintessence shard, he wasn't all that surprised that Han Hao survived the visit. Wasir and Asura also did not suspect anything. They were just rather surprised that the overgod of death was so mighty that he could learn about Han Hao's appearing at the Omphalos so quickly. Only Tyre had a pensive look. He looked deeply at Han Hao as though wanting to see everything in Han Hao's body and soul. Why? Why didn't he kill Han Hao? Could it be that elder brother got it wrong? How is that possible? Tyre was very shocked and confused. He thought that Han Hao would be slaughtered when the overgod of death visited him and found the quintessence shard on him. If there's nothing else, I shall take my leave. Han Hao did not continue feigning civility with the sovereigns after obtaining the information he wanted from Tyre and Log. He stood up and instructed Polo, let's move. Han Hao then left the scene. Before he left, he stealthily took a glance at the ice-gold Wasir. Let's disperse. If Dagmar dared intrude the Omphalos all by himself, then it must mean that the God-Hunter Alliance will attack very soon. Time to go back to our bases and stand by to face the invasion, said Tyre, before also taking his leave. As soon as Han Hao left the region, he went to the house of Han's sovereign shop with his gang under the pretense that he wanted to purchase Celestial Pearl's medicines, but using Han Shuo's secret chamber in actuality. Han Shuo and Han Hao had kept their relationship so secretive that even ordinary House of Han servants had no clue about it. The manager of this Celestial Pearl branch, however, was aware of the secret. After politely leading Han Hao to the secret chamber, he dismissed himself and instructed their private security to watch out for intruders. Han Hao had selected this secret chamber, where Han Shuo usually used for cultivating when in the Omphalos, because it was protected by unique formations and matrices. When inside, he won't have to worry about being spied on or disturbed. After sitting crossed-legged on the mat, Han Hao gradually opened up his soul while concealing the aura on his body. At this moment, his main body, located far in the Destiny Dominion, was also sitting cross-legged. His eyes suddenly opened and shone with strings of tiny inscriptions flashing through his pupils. A bizarre energy began emanating from his body, affecting the element of death in the environment. Nestor, the overwrought of death, had yet to leave the Omphalos. His head was lowered as he racked his brain, wondering if he had missed something. Then, suddenly, his eyes lit up and he stared in the direction of the Destiny Dominion. Han Hao was the last person on his list. When Nestor discovered no quintessence shard on Han Hao, he was incomparably disappointed. He even started doubting his investigative skills. He couldn't understand why he yielded nothing even though he had examined every energy of death experts in the fringe. The sudden activation of the quintessence shard in the Destiny Dominion had jolted Nestor. His eyes glistened as he mumbled to himself, so it turns out that the fella had left the fringe? Yes, of course it would. How would he have the guts to stay here when he sensed that I'm nearby? Nestor immediately started leaving. With one thought, he soared to the sky and vanished. The domed boundary above the omphalos had not the slightest effect on him. Finally, Tyre and Log looked at the sky and simultaneously let out a sigh. The domed boundary above the omphalos was jointly deployed by the two sovereigns. The ground boundary was deployed by Asura, while Wasir applied his frigid energy on the city walls. When the overgod of death pierced through domed boundary, Tyre and Log, who had deployed it, would sense something. They could tell that Nestor had left even without seeing it. To characters like Tyre and Log, who were used to controlling others' lives, it was very uncomfortable to have an even mightier being who could end their lives in a snap anywhere nearby. They desperately hoped that the overgod of death would leave the land of chaos and never return. Tyre took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He then left the omphalos and returned to the same volcano, dialed his brother Daka, and informed him of what just happened. Got it, Dagmar has just returned. He too said that he found no aura of the quintessence shard on Han Hao. This is very strange. I wonder what he had done to the shard, remarked Daka, who was also surprised and confused. He couldn't figure out what was going on as logically speaking. Anyone who obtained a quintessence shard should keep it firmly in their hands and would never part with it. Forget about it, let's stop concerning ourselves about Han Hao, Daka asked with his brows bunched. Are you sure that the overgod has left? He should have. He had examined every expert in the fringe, and I don't think that he had any more reasons to stay in the fringe. And based on my senses, I can vaguely tell that he went in the direction of the Destiny Dominion. Perhaps he is going to seek the Destiny Goddess advice, replied Tyre after thinking for a moment. Very well, Daka nodded before he put on a cold smirk and said, then we can begin our operation. You should get prepared. Tomorrow shall be the day that we Godhunter Alliance officially invade the fringe. You will be facing the hegemons of wind and lightning. They are the weakest of us all, so you don't need to be too worried. As to Brian, he will be facing me, Dagmar, Acer, and Salas. I will raise his pandemonium to the ground. Haha, after this war, we brother will become the most influential and powerful existences after the 12 overgods, said Tyre in a maniacal laugh. Over at the Destiny Dominion, Han Hao, who had deliberately released the shard's energy, sensed that Nestor was rushing towards him from the fringe. He smirked and thought, so what if you're the overgod? You still get fooled the same. From now on, I just need to stay cautious, and you will never know that I have the shard. And when I have fused the shard's energy with demonic arts, I will take the quintessence from you. After sensing that Nestor was on his way, Han Hao again concealed his aura. He slowly got up to his feet and ready to take a detour back to the fringe. It was at this moment that a petite figure suddenly appeared before Han Hao. She stared at Han Hao with an astonished face and asked, "Is it you who released that energy just then?" Han Hao was startled, and his face quickly turned cold. He looked all around in caution before he asked, "Who are you?" Han Hao had sensed a very unique soul undulation coming from the little girl. Her soul was much mightier than even late-stage high gods like Polo. Han Hao also sensed that she was no ordinary life form. It made Han Hao felt threatened. I'm Andrina. This is the Destiny Dominion, my home. Andrina bunched her brows slightly as she sized up Han Hao. It suddenly turned to a frown, and she asked in a cold voice, I sense Godhunter's aura on you. You are a Godhunter, aren't you? Indeed I am. What are you gonna do about it? Han Hao took out his bone spear and held it in his hand. He took an alerted stance. That is all that I need to know, said Andrina in an ice-gold face. Her hand suddenly glowed with the splendid radiance of crystals, and she punched at Han Hao. Han Hao was rather surprised that he couldn't sense any of the 12 fundamental forces on Andrina. The gaudy radiance in her fist contained just the purest power of energy crystals, as though her fist was an energy blast that came from a super-sized energy crystal cannon. It was not just terrifying, but also very agile. Han Hao did not know who Andrina was and had no idea that she and his father were close friends. Andrina, meanwhile, didn't even know that Han Xiu had children. Han Hao immediately considered Andrina as a mighty opponent as soon as she launched an attack. With a wave of his bone spear, the elements of death that were drawn to the area by the quintessence shard were energized. The boundaries of weakness, fear, and aging enveloping the entire region were instantly formed. Simultaneously, a thin, grayish film took shape at the front of Han Hao. There were tiny streams of the energy of death gently circulating on it. "Oh!" cried Andrina in surprise. She did not expect Han Hao's strength to be so powerful. He was much mightier than nearly all the God Hunter experts she had met. With that, Andrina immediately unleashed her full power. The gaudy radiances on her hand transformed into matter. A big energy crystal was formed with a glowing spheroid embedded in the center. It emanated scorching rays as though it was the core of a star that contained nearly infinite energy. The goddess of destiny had been taking good care of Andrine. Her strength had soared substantially ever since she was brought home from the Darkness Dominion. The shield that Han Hao formed using the energy of death was defeated by Andrina's all-out attack. It made a large hole in Han Hao's shield. The energy crystal consolidated from radiances was propelled by its core. Carrying formidable power, it spun and rolled towards Han Hao. The boundaries of weakness, fear, and aging had not the slightest effect on a life form as unique as Andrina. Chapter 945. On the Brink of War, GDK 945. On the brink of war, Andrina seemed just as vigorous when inside the 3 boundaries of death. There was no sign that she was affected by weakness, fear, or aging. A gaudy, blazing radiance that was even brighter than the sun shone from her chest, and it lit up the region. The oval sphere in the center of the energy crystal resonated with the gaudy radiance on Andrina's chest. It gave off a burning radiance as it shot towards Han Hao with tremendous power. When Han Hao saw that Andrina was immune to the boundaries of death, he immediately changed his attack strategy. In an instant, he drew the element of death powering those boundaries into his bone spear, and he abruptly retreated to avoid the rolling crystal ball. "Wanna run?" Andrina sneered. She opened her palm and started moving her little fingers as though she was playing an invisible harp. The crystal ball under Andrina's control was extremely agile. It maneuvered around like a fighter jet. It turned and tracked Han Hao firmly, not giving him any chance of escaping. Despite the grave situation, Han Hao's heart remained as calm as still water. His bewitching eyes glistened with sinister lights. Then suddenly, he stopped and stood his ground. Whoosh! The 7 bone spurs behind his back violently shot out and aimed themselves at the sneering Andrina. Simultaneously, he hurled the bone spear in his hand. The shriek and wails of hundreds of thousands of tormented souls sounded, while wisps of ink-dark smoke emanated from the bone spear. They spread and curled around the bone spear before turning into an enormous, malevolent, hideous face. A chilling, frigid wind blew out of nowhere. The bone spear, which was supposed to be inanimate, suddenly transformed into a terrifying, ferocious monster. It opened its enormous mouth lined with sharp teeth. A sinister killing intent, condensed from hundreds of thousands of tormented souls, erupted. The sneering Andrina was jolted, and she put on a shocked expression. She didn't expect that the normal-looking bone spear would contain such a terrifying amount of sinister power. Before Andrina could react, the bone spear-turned monster swallowed the crystal ball of Andrina.